Perfect. I'd like to take a moment before we start to talk about the land acknowledgement. It's really important for us to acknowledge the traditional territories in which we live and work as part of our commitment to decolonization and the TRC calls to action. So I'd like to begin by honoring and acknowledging that the offices of eCampus Ontario and where I am joining you from today are located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This land is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I also recognize that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and that this territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee. This agreement represents a commitment to share and protect the land and responsibly care for its resources in harmony. It's important to acknowledge the land, recognizing that I'm a settler who has benefited from it, whether it's through hiking, camping, travel, or simply just living and residing here. And so it's very essential to honor the value and significance of the land that I and eCampus Ontario continue to benefit from. On the agenda today, I have a quick, brief introduction to eCampus Ontario, EdTech Sandbox, my baby that I work on. And we have a lovely panel discussion hosted by our friends at FeedbackFruits, little Q&A. And then at the end, I will be sending around a survey. And this is my one ask to you. Please, please, please fill out the survey because it allows me, your feedback helps me continue hosting these wonderful events, bringing together community, bringing together really interesting people from different schools across Ontario and the country. So please fill out the survey. It is very important to me. It would make me very happy. And then I can talk about it in my future webinars, how amazing all the attendees here were filling out the survey. So you guys can become a success story. This is the dream. Let's tell you a little bit about eCampus Ontario. So as some of you know, eCampus Ontario is a not-for-profit organization. We are funded by the Government of Ontario, and we lead a group of 56 publicly funded colleges, universities, and Indigenous institutes across Ontario. Our goal is to promote the use of educational technologies and digital learning environments, particularly through our one platform EdTech Sandbox, but also the many other platforms, programs, and services that we have. And the EdTech Sandbox itself is created to provide a safe and risk-free space for institutions to experiment with educational technology tools. And so we'll drop a little link in the chat for you to explore a little bit more about EdTech Sandbox. But this really helps. We run on a DPRA model. Sounds fancy, isn't that fancy? You can discover different tools, pilot them for the short term, explore their pedagogical potential, review their capabilities through assessments and telling your friends what you think, and then adopt technologies by accessing community support channels, resources, product information. So if you have any questions, we've got our email in the chat. And then the focus for today's webinar, hosted by FeedbackFruits, is to explore assessment in the age of AI. And I do remember we had a planning meeting for this earlier this week. And I remember sitting with all the wonderful people you're about to hear from, thinking, I wish we could record this, because already the conversation was so rich, so amazing. I felt like I was learning so much. So you guys are really in for a treat today. We have some wonderful people in the room that have lots of very interesting things to say. And so I hope you enjoy the discussion we're about to have and learn lots. And this is not the end of the wonderful things that we have planned with FeedbackFruits. We have two more webinars coming up or workshops. These are more of a hands-on, gritty, actually get to experience the tool for yourself. So the links are in the chat. Please register. We have them in English and in French. So choose the language that you'd like, register for that, and I hope to see you in those. And now we have our lovely host, our lovely panelists. Their names are here. You're going to hear introductions from somebody else. So I will turn it over to Bas.
Thank you so much for that, Deanne. And thanks so much for having us, eCampus Ontario, and host this webinar together with us at FeedbackFruits. My name is Bas Hinteman. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with FeedbackFruits. And today I'm really honored to announce all these lovely panelists. We have Tombor, also known as Z for Intimi, here at FeedbackFruits, who will be moderating the panel for us. And then, of course, we have Aaron joining us from the University of Guelph as the Director the Office of Teaching and Learning. We have Julian, who is running multimedia production and is a support lead at Queen's University. And we have Lindsay, the Director of Transformative Teaching and Learning at the University of Brunswick. We're really excited to dive into this highly timely topic of how we need to rethink assessment in the age of AI. I think there's lovely perspectives to hear. So I'll leave it up to you all and hope you have a lovely panel together.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bas, also for joining so late. Before I introduce myself, I actually want to start with a very quick story because I promised people that we want to have today's panel discussion as almost like a fireside chat, if you will, or kind of like a living room conversation. And those very often start with stories. So last weekend, I actually met a relative of mine. He's 15 years old, about to start high school, actually. And I asked him, like, just wanted to have a chit chat. What are some hobbies or activities that you do next to high school when you're not studying? And then he started listing things like I play basketball, I go to dancing classes, I learn extra 2 languages, and I'm learning how to play the drum. And then I asked him, like, how do you have time for all these things while you are preparing for high school and having these big, difficult, like assignments and projects and homeworks? I'm like, how much time do you spend on homework these days? And he he was really laughing at me, like Z, you're so old. Like we only use AI tools to complete all our assignments. Let that be an essay, let that be a quizzing, a project outline, to design slides that we're gonna present. So if this is what's happening between primary school and high school, I want to start today's panel discussion with a fun kind of one word round. So I want to ask the panelists to give me one word, just one word, whatever comes to mind when it comes to biggest threats of artificial intelligence tools in higher education. And sorry to put you on the spot. I'm gonna pass the microphone first to Lindsay.
Oh, that's a good challenge. I mean, one word, John Boy, you're trying to torture us here. Um, I'm gonna go with the word skipping, and then I know I should just stop there because it's one word, but like with reference to like skipping over the process.
Erin,
I'm going to take a page from Lindsay's book and say a word and a bit more. Identity. I think the challenge to the identity of what it means to be a post-secondary institution, and then the identity of a researcher, if so much of what is valued is knowledge and expertise, and that is opened up, then identity is at risk.
skipping identity. I also see some in the chat of this call, so people feel free to
Mhm.
drop some in. I see dumbness, I see intelligence, credibility, plagiarism. Julian, passing on the microphone to you.
Skills, I
Skills.
think. Skills. Yeah, it's going the way of I want to say like handwriting used to be, like it's something that we get to a certain point where we know how to research that researching skill, for example, Aaron was saying, like it it now becomes we're no longer going to the library where we're not actually reading the articles. We're plugging it into a machine that is going to give us the gist of what you need to know. That may or may not be, you know, accurate. I mean, skills. You're
I
you're
love
not
how you
you're not
started
gaining
with
those. You're not losing those skills. You're not gaining any skills by again, depending on how you use it, but assuming if you're relying heavily on it, then those pieces disappear.
I love how the first skill you mentioned was was handwriting, and probably my 15-year-old relative could agree a lot with this, right? All he's doing is copy pasting high school assignments into some AI tool and not even having to write them down with his 2 hands. I see also creativity, responsible problem solving, redundancy. Now, let's flip it to the positive side. Give me one word that comes to mind when you think of the biggest opportunities that are brought by AI in higher education. And now let's go the other way around. Julian,
Um, I would probably say, are we doing one word? Okay,
one word plus
we're
a bit
doing,
of cheating if you want.
yeah. I would say, I would definitely, I don't want to say pass. That you, I'm thinking of advantages, and there are advantages. I
I'm
would
seeing some
say,
like freedom,
I would say,
assistance,
I would say,
evolution, iteration, time in the chat.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would, yeah, I think probably a good one would be, can we just, if we use one word, I say start. Like it might be the new way, like when I was going to school, my instructor would tell me that the Wikipedia is a good place to start.
Oh, yeah.
And it gives you an idea of research that might be out there or something that might already be out. It's a starting point. It's a good tool if you are looking for, yeah, just some ideas of where to start. I mean, for anything.
Mhm.
Erin.
Personalization. I
Mhm.
think there's tremendous opportunity to do at scale what we know really supports learning. And that's instant feedback that's customized and personalized and an infinite number of ways that a student could practice, um, iterate, and change their
Yeah.
learning.
One of the things I truly hated about my university studies was that I started the most popular bachelor's in one of the most popular universities in the Netherlands, business administration. We were like 1,800 students starting a course. And the lack of personalization that I felt, both in terms of the assignments we had to do, the
Yeah.
feedback I got from the instructors was incredible. They had to hire the Amsterdam biggest theater just for a lecture because we were so many people that it couldn't fit
Yeah.
in. Imagine the lack of back and forth there. Lindsay, one word.
The problem with going last is that it looks like I stole my ideas from the chat. So I just want to, it's probably blurred out. If it weren't blurred out, you'd see that I wrote it before it was in the chat. Evolution. I just think we're at a moment in time where it's fun to look at the past and wax poetic about it, but the ship has sailed. So we're in an evolution of what education is. And it's kind of fun and exciting to discover what this new landscape is and how we're going to serve the needs of the learners because they still have needs. That hasn't changed. So evolution, Michael Kerr wrote it too. Great minds think alike.
Looking at the Zoom chat also with a lot of terminologies coming in from folks, I notice that a lot of these are already related to course design elements or maybe assessment practices. Also, what you said, Erin, about personalization. So I want to gear the conversation a bit about what are some course designs, in your opinion, or some assessment practices that you think worked well in the age of generative AI? Maybe you can share some examples from your institution to start with, because it seems like there are a lot of threats, right? There are a lot of opportunities. Let's see what came alive. I don't know who wants to share a few thoughts on that, some good practices. And I'm going to stop throwing around the microphone because I think that's not really how a fireside chat goes or a living room discussion.
I think one of the first things that we noticed at the University of New Brunswick is that with this disruption to some of our traditional forms of assessment, and particularly the essay as a form of summative assessment, it had to be chucked out the window so quickly. You see, people don't trust it anymore to get that summative insight into what's going on with their students. All of a sudden, all those instructors, all those faculty members were kind of thrust toward authentic assessments and more creative assessments, I would say, as a way to tap into what their students were doing with a little more confidence that maybe they were getting insights into what their students could do and also knew. So one of the simplest things that we see, and we're seeing a lot of, is podcasting and just encouraging students to have conversations with one another and record it and submit those conversations as a form of summative assessment, which I think is such a simple design, but a really rich design.
Can I leap in on that? My disciplinary background, for those who I haven't met, my disciplinary background is English and cultural studies, and I'm not ready to let go of the essay or of writing as a form of thinking. And so I've been talking to faculty members at Guelph about how they're reimagining their course design and assessment design in a way that maybe I think I've been using in a teaching and learning center, you're like, yes, you need authentic assessment, but what does that actually, how's that understood? And sometimes that's understood as, yeah, like do something fun and creative. For some disciplines, and this is where I think disciplinary difference really matters and how we reimagine assessment. Some instructors are implicitly adopting, which many of you are familiar with, I'm sure, the two-lane assessment structure of open and secure, where for a class where essay writing is still a meaningful way of understanding how students have interrogated, analyzed, interpreted, understood text, understood cultural text, what they're offering instead is, use some class time to begin the writing process. And I'm going to watch and be there and have conversations with you as you start writing. And then when I see your essay submission come in, I'm going to look at what was first done in class in this invigilated space. So a way of looking at open and secure assessment, not necessarily as just a high stakes invigilated exam, but as process-based learning. And I think the future for us in post-secondary around assessment really does need to be that consideration of what needs to be secure for the assurance of learning, and where we open up assessment, where AI might be integrated into that process, providing some of that personalized space, the chance for students to still meaningfully engage with ways of thinking that I'm seeing in the chat, the return to blooms isn't really what I necessarily what I'm arguing for, but rather that like the difficult work of learning. Like learning is hard, and like to be incentivized to do that hard work, whether it's in class or whether there's that sort of invigilated component that would get you there, recognizing, of course, the complexity of secure assessment in terms of accessibility and universal design, and still wanting to think through the multiple ways that you might want to have students participate in that secure kind of assessment. And yes, they can certainly create a podcast script and have AI do it, like the Notebook LM. Just pop it in there.
There were two things that caught my attention, and in a second I'll pass it to you, Julian. One was you mentioned the discipline, that an ideal form of assessment will, of course, depend on the discipline. And I want to challenge that a little bit. And then the second thing that caught my attention was the word process, the focus on the learning process, not only on the outcome. Because I'm super lucky these days. I speak to a lot of institutions, especially in North American, but a lot of them realize is that if throughout the learning process, regardless of the discipline, let that be, I don't know, STEM course, business, some writing intensive course, biology, whatever. If you put students to work collaboratively on something they enjoy, let's say in a group assignment format or in a discussion format, in a peer-to-peer feedbacks, just the pedagogy itself, they will be a lot less likely to use generative AI tools just for cheating. So I'm curious, how do you reflect on this, Erin, and how do you, yeah.
Oh, I think you're getting at one of the, from an educational developer perspective, one of the joys that generative AI has brought is that it's giving us the opportunity to, the incentive structure for faculty to change their course design and assessment design to the practices we've known for decades, really support learning, active learning, opportunity for peer-based, where the zone of proximal development is small, where you've got authentic assessment, process-based learning. This is stuff that we have been saying and working with our partners, working with faculty to amplify for decades. So yes, there's this tremendous incentive to change. Where I'm not sure I'm as quite sold on the lack of disciplinary difference of those practices, active, peer-based, group learning, yes, interdisciplinary in application. I think where I'd nuance it is that the integration of generative AI into the program learning outcomes and the expectations of those graduates by the workforce do vary by discipline, and the appropriateness of attending to generative AI or a gentle AI or just AI writ large in the content of the course and then in the assessment design ought to and necessarily vary by discipline. Maybe wrong. Maybe that's true today, but not true in a year. Maybe, yeah.
You speak to my heart as soon as you talk about programmatic outcomes, and the way those filter through and would change the way we do assessments. But I do wonder if, like, a through line of all university education at this point, I'm not sold on what I'm saying here, so you can argue with me, Erin, I know you will, is that shift back to the process, because the outcome we can skip to and we can dance this way and that way. But generative AI is just fundamentally the changing the way we all create our outputs. So what we really have to focus on for our students is that they are capable of doing the process. If push comes to shove, if the internet goes down, they will have the skills and that foundational knowledge that they need to engage in the process of whatever their disciplinary specialism is. And then I think in terms of assessment and how we go about and translate that into university practice, maybe it's that idea of it being iterative practice. So a practical example would be not just one of our professors, but one of our professors here did do a traditional essay. I love the traditional essay too, and gave the feedback on that first version. And then what they were looking at was not how good the final outcome was, but the difference from the first to the second.
Yeah.
And just
And the
trying to,
metacognitive reflection that,
Yeah.
like, you add, here's why I made the changes that I did, for sure. Julian, I don't know if you want to jump in. I will say more, but I will always talk and fill the room, so I'll pause.
No problem. I will say there was a mixed reaction here, probably mostly panic. And there was a lot of it around plagiarism and intellectual property, ownership of work. And we went a couple of directions with it. We had some instructors that did really embrace the idea of it, and like we had this worked out very well, a disruptive technology course. So AI fit in perfectly. And I think what they ended up doing was assigning students to use one of the chatbot services and sort of critique the output. And that was sort of their workaround for the assessment, where it was expected that it was not their own work, but the critique would, be their own output for the assignment. We did end up we had a couple of courses that, and this is me, I'm not an instructional designer. I work more on the technical side of things. So I got to coordinate, sort of with the ed tech piece of that. We've done some courses where it's been all live, where students need to attend a specific tutorial session, go into breakout groups, work on something, and submit that work that same time. That the idea was that this mitigates the possibility of somebody, popping in their response into a chatbot. It's getting increasingly difficult now. This was already a couple of years ago, but it's integrated in everything. So those pieces are just getting more and more. Like, I think the overall response was it's inevitable. It's something that really can't be discouraging. Will only increase its use. So the thinking was, how do we change the pedagogy so that it is inclusive for these types of technologies? I think on the exam side, I'm seeing a lot more of online proctoring, which may or may not be a good thing. But yeah, I think that's sort of the gist of what's happening here. And also knowing that, because it's something that's going to be used, we are developing a lot of policies around responsible AI use. And I know our IT department is working really hard to just build in-house solutions, knowing that data will be something that at least the university has more control over versus Elon.
So there are two use cases that you both just shared, Lindsay and Julian, that caught my attention, right? One was where the students had to critique the output of some AI tool, and then they maybe got graded on that critique. And then Lindsay's example was iterative writing, where I make a submission and then I improve that submission, and then my grade or my assessment is determined on how I improve it and the process of improving that, right? Now, quick question. what if I'm asking one AI tool to critique the output of another AI tool? Or what if I'm now asking an AI tool to improve whatever I wrote? And then with that, I would throw the microphone to Erin, who showed me something completely mind-boggling the other day.
Comment?
Yeah, like basically just walk us through, please. But what I'm
Yeah.
remembering is this agent just completed the whole LMS course
Yeah.
without student intervention. So let's chat a bit about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I'm sure many of you have been experimenting or seen agental AI or autonomous AI in practice. ChatGPT, when you turn on agent mode, will take over the task that you're giving. Perplexity has a browser called Comet that will, thank you so much, Natalia. That's Comet that's being very aggressively marketed to students as a learning tool. I think the best way I've been able to think about it is generative AI creates and agental AI or autonomous AI acts. So if you think about that kind of division between create and act, I find that really helpful. What Comet or agent mode will do is if you give it a goal, so an example goal might be complete my module and all assessments. It will take over your browser or take over your module and independently complete all parts of the module. And our team here at the Office of Teaching and Learning at the University of Guelph, we've been experimenting with within modules, what are some of the things that Comet or agent mode are able to do? And it's watching a complete video and then answering questions based on that video. It's working through a PowerPoint slide deck in our CourseLink, our D2L environment, answering questions about that, quizzes, reflective writing, H5P interactives. We've been experimenting with some of the FeedbackFruits tools, and it's able to confidently respond to peer feedback and give group feedback. So, Zambor, some follow-up that we can think about in terms of the FeedbackFruits stuff. But
I
yes.
hope Bas, our Chief Strategy Officer, stayed here.
Yes, yeah.
Taking notes.
Certainly the privacy notice that Natalia's adding there, it's asking, you to input your passwords. And so when I'm demoing it and I'm hosting a demo session for our University of Guelph, sorry, I'm all tangled, colleagues tomorrow, you're inputting your username and your password for any of your sort of enterprise systems within those agents. And it's talking about the risks around data security and privacy there are significant. We can recognize those as significant concerns and hold at the same time the likelihood that members of our institutional communities are making use of these tools. And so part of what I see our role in the Teaching Learning Center is about both awareness and trying to think about the impossibility of winning an arms race. So Julian, when you're talking about the sort of like, we're trying to get one step ahead, we're trying to, consider as an institution whether that is that the approach we want to take of trying to like constantly get find a silver bullet for this? Okay, we're going to use Respondus or we're going to do an invigilated piece, and instead really like moving towards that consideration of if these are the incentive structures for students to commit academic misconduct are the same for researchers or staff members, where you're driven by tight timelines, the perception that other people are using these tools and cheating, that's so high stakes that if I don't use this tool, it's going to, cause me irreparable academic harm. Can we explore some of those cultural conditions around integrity rather than focusing our energy solely on the sort of policing and catching, and whether that's change to course design or assessment design, it is largely cultural shift that is hard. And I think faculty are so tired, and I'm tired. And I think the messaging of, yeah, you just have to redesign your assessment, you have to redesign your course is landing with a thud, in part because of that exhaustion and the sense of there isn't a solution that we're going to get to that's going to solve this for the next 10 years. This is change at a generational scale for all of us, but certainly post-secondary hardly hit.
Can I push that a little bit further? In two directions. First of all, and I think we share the perspective. I think most people working in universities would share the perspective that we really can't become police officers. That's not why we chose this career path. And I love the phrase, like, we're not going to win this arms race. But I wonder too if what we're forgetting about is that it's actually probably a small proportion of our learners who consciously are engaging in academic misconduct with generative AI. In the same way that a lot of cases of plagiarism aren't intentional plagiarism, there's going to be a lot of, like your 15-year-old nephew. I had a high school babysitter for my kids this summer who was boasting to me about how she's using generative AI in order to summarize the readings that she was being assigned in high school, even pulling out the quotes that she was going to integrate into her essays. And for her, this wasn't cheating. For her, this was doing it in a more efficient way. And she didn't see that larger story that someone with a different perspective in education would see and say, ooh, well, your critical thinking skills, your data extraction skills, you know, all of these core competencies or transversal durable skills, whatever you want to call them, those are the things that you're removing from your learning process by using generative AI in this manner. So that's one thing is that maybe there's space in there to work with learners to help them understand additive and then subtractive ways to be working with generative AI, not just with faculty members, not just revisioning assessments. But then going back to something Jean-Bour had said at the beginning, which is this notion of group work, maybe focusing also on enjoyment of learning, because there's really good evidence about how your enjoyment of your instructor, your professor, and your enjoyment of peer-to-peer interactions changes the way you're engaging in a course. It changes your persistence through your university education, through any education. So maybe that's also a call to return to education as something joyous and lively and experimental, and to consciously revector in that sense, that we're not just focused on the end grade. I mean, I bemoan that our undergraduates are so fixated on what grade they get at the end of the year.
I love how you brought up the concept of joy. I recently spoke to a fashion design instructor, and they told me this really cool story that they had an in-class discussion, and the instructor said, "Folks, students, I want you to sit in groups and try to design the ugliest t-shirt that you ever could barely dream of. And then together we're going to analyze why is that ugly, where in history maybe those elements appeared, how it relates to sociology and people's decisions about what they buy. Like afterwards, there was, of course, an academic outcome of that silly sounding discussion, but because of the joy and the group element and the fun it started, it turned out that, and also students in the follow-up assignments weren't using that much cheating tools. Maybe they used generative AI, but what the instructor reported is a higher level of learning in general because it started with joy. So maybe that's also something to discuss, and I'm seeing some comments in the chat, get rid of grades, right? That's what Lindsay implied to some aspect. What I want us to discuss a little bit, and Julian, please chip in here, is there a trade-off between joy and learning outcomes?
Julian,
You're
you're
on
on
mute.
mute, friend.
Yep. I want to say it depends. It's probably balance. Anyone else find that?
Uh, the trade-off between joy and learning outcomes, I think from my experience, where there's joy for learning, it's where that learning is scaffolded and supported, and the challenge feels
And personalized, maybe?
yeah, personalized, and the challenge is appropriately set, that I feel like I can be successful and I have the supports that I need to be successful. So I think I don't see them as certainly not mutually exclusive, but I think the structural pieces that need to be in place for a joy-filled learning experience, and one that also recognizes learning is uncomfortable a lot of the time, that is difficult, that it is work, that there can be joy in that. Like when I learn a new thing, I'm struggling as I'm learning, and I experience pleasure from the intrinsic motivation when I figured it out. I also like grades though. Like when someone gives me a gold star and I get like an excellent on my performance review, I am satisfied. And so I do not begrudge students who are also incentivized in that structure, Lindsay.
But which is more satisfying though?
Yeah.
Is it getting the A, or is it getting the paragraph from your instructor that says, the way you framed this argument was a thing of beauty, and you're
I'm the wrong person to ask that question,
you know,
I'll say
or when
an
your
A every
peers
day.
tell you that. Even better, when you're someone sitting next to you
That's
is
right.
telling you that. That's a very nice feeling.
Yeah, and so I mean, I completely agree. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but I think that kind of focus on rich feedback and rich experiences, and this is nothing shocking, and nobody's really going to shake their head. I think it's useful if we encourage our learners to value these things at least as much as they value the number or the letter that they receive on a transcript. And that they value their own growth, you know, because, and again, anybody who's taught, I'm sure you've said this, like sometimes the C that my student earns is more meaningful and more something to put up on your fridge and feel proud of than the A+ that another student got because they worked hard for that C. And like, how do we really communicate that to learners? It has got to be through the feedback process, because the grade is never going to be giving them the satisfaction they need.
And I've seen in the chat there the pieces around things about, like you could imagine specifications grading or contract grading, or where learners are better defining for themselves what success looks like in terms of their course learning, I think might have a relationship to joy. But one of the things from a couple of minutes ago that this is calling up for me is where our students can serve as partners in making some of these decisions. So seeing some colleagues from McMaster on the call who have, you know, such a brilliant students as partners program that they've integrated into a number of different things. But, you know, one of the ways they incorporate students as partners is in the course redesign process, where you have students valued for their lived experience of learners in the course, working with faculty members to reimagine how that course and assessment is designed. I think particularly important right now, where we know many students are using these tools to enhance their learning, not necessarily to cheat, not necessarily to circumvent critical thinking and knowledge, but as like, help me with practice questions, help me explain this concept in a different way, personalize this for me. And if our entire attention is on prohibition and abstinence, we are going to miss all of those ways that learning can be improved, enhanced, and supported. And our students, if they are afraid to tell us the ways that they are using it because they're afraid of getting in trouble, we are missing a gigantic pool of expertise that could really help all of us in the sort of administrative and academic wing reimagine what could be valuable.
I'm going to give you a heart on that one, Erin.
Sure. I think it's an upvote to anybody who has the structure for student partnership. And if you don't, and you want to try it, I will tell you to talk to Chris Knorr and Erin Allard, who I saw. I think Jenny Blaney's here too. I'm sure other institutions do as well. Just admire their approach so much.
So folks, a lot of things we discussed sound resource intensive. Time consuming, expensive, difficult. So yeah, exactly. So because we said, hey, let's work with faculty on helping them redesign their assessments, but sometimes they are tired of it because it can take so much time. We spoke about maybe including some sort of a student committee. What do you think are the biggest limitations that stop us from implementing all these wonderful ideas at scale? So many magic wand ideas that we just had the magic wand today and we swung it, right? And then does it really get happen? Yeah.
I think I'm noticing Stephanie Allen in the chat here is really also hitting the nail on the head. Is that as soon as you get into larger cohorts, these things become increasingly difficult. So it's easy to do this with a seminar class, a class of 20, class of 40, maybe you're okay. And then once you get into larger numbers of students, it becomes increasingly difficult, even with the presence of TAs in those large cohorts, the consistency of the feedback being provided by TAs and the experiences of students, you have more opportunity for divergence that would, equate to inequity. But I'm going to stop talking because Julian, you're an expert in the technology. You tell us.
Yeah, so kind of just echoing what you're saying, Lindsay. I think a limitation is human resources. We talk about implementing a lot of ed tech, a lot of AI, and the automatic assumption is it's going to make workload lighter for teaching teams. But in reality, if you're doing it not properly, but I mean, in many cases, it just changes the workload. You might find that it might be a little bit lighter than going through and intensively grading each individual essay, but it's keeping all of these pieces in check. And making sure that technology is working in a consistent way, that students have the proper supports that they need to use these pieces of technology. So it's I what we typically say when we start introducing ed tech is like the expectate like yes, it will change. You might not be grading as much, but you will be working in a different way. It's not going to it's likely not going to reduce your teaching hours. In some ways, it might actually increase it. But it's creating a more engaging environment for the students. And as you mentioned, as we scale up, it means that it's a balance between how much you want to integrate it into your classes, how much available hours you have to dedicate to it, and kind of scaling it accordingly. So that means I don't want to say water it down, but you might need to, for larger cohorts, to make sure that you're meeting all of the required hours and you're not overworking everyone. You might need to change how that assessment is going to work in a large classroom versus a small one. There's it's tricky because you don't want to just do a hands-off type situation. You're going to have it's probably going to be a bad scene. You still need to be very involved when you're using any type of ed tech, and especially AI.
So we had just your last sentence, right? Instructors still want to remain involved. They want to intervene. They want to control this learning environment. They don't just want students to do their own thing.
It's the Wild West.
Otherwise it becomes the Wild West indeed. And
Yeah.
a use case came to mind, and this is, I think, a ridiculously positive use case, if I can say that. This was in Australia, maybe at Deakin University, where you have huge distances, right? You have a lot of remote students because they just can't commute hours and hours, huge distances there. So already, this must have been about 6, 7 years ago. At Deakin University, there was an engineering course with about 6,000 students. And they wanted to do group work with 6,000 students, groups of 4 or 5 students in all different locations. And then you might ask, okay, then how do you form those groups that they become compatible? How can the instructor intervene when there are some free riders, some students who are not taking their fair share of work? And in many cases, the answer became technology, right? Using various tools where students assess each other's collaboration skills, and the instructor can easily spot a group where there is a conflict and then maybe approach those individuals who might be outliers in those groups. So a question I want to throw out there is, indeed, how much control you think instructors should keep in these alternative assessments? We've seen ungrading in the group chat. Or how much can they let loose, like when you're horse riding and you're like, oh, see what happens.
Lindsay?
Oh, I'm
You
staring
see
at
me like, inhale and I'll go.
I think
Yeah.
it's calculated risk, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But everybody would make their own decisions. To be really experimental, wildly experimental, do ungrading. I'd lean toward the smaller cohort on these pieces, and then a little more refined on the larger cohorts. Though I do think approaches that are really well established to be beneficial for students, like active learning, like having group work opportunities. We shouldn't be shy of these things. It's just finding the right technologies to support them. Barb Mercer over there has mentioned that a lot of this is catered toward in-person programming, might not be appropriate for asynchronous. I'd argue so long as you have cohorting, and you're moving students through at clustered, like staged intervals, these practice should translate it. It just, you know, over the course of the week, you're engaging with your peers. Over the course of the week, you're engaging with your instructor. You know, practically, sometimes we'll advise to our faculty, we'll just try one experimental thing in your course and see how it goes. And then next year you have that plus one more, because they're in it for the long game.
Yeah, that's what I always promote when we start. We usually do an initial consult when we start developing a course, and we have an instructor that wants to do the pie in the sky, 5 different ed tech tools, all of these different projects, and we really we don't want to discourage it. We love the enthusiasm, but like to make sure you have a consistent, the students have a consistent experience. Let's start with one and see how it goes, because it could, yeah, it's better to do it as an iterative approach than all at once. And I just want to quick, like, I don't know if we should be, if we're looking at these questions and answers, I saw one came in about how do we understand students' individual progress in group activities? And I was thinking about that one. I want to comment really quick on it because we have, like, that was one of our challenges in a lot of our online courses, was especially courses that were on campus converted to online, is how do we do group work in an online environment, and especially how do we know when students are actually doing the work. So I know what we did was we had a peer evaluation system at the end of the activity, and we sort of left it to the instructor to review the data, and we went everywhere from and as an incentive to do the peer evaluation, students just got a participation mark, and that data went back to the instructor for them to review and see where if there were groups where one student did all the work and no one was pulling their weight, they took some sort of action, and that depended on what the instructor wanted. I think they went as far as scaling the final grade, not the final, but the final assignment grade based on what they received from the peer feedback, for the peer evaluation, I mean, and not necessarily a plug for FeedbackFruits. We were using different tools before, but now we're using FeedbackFruits for that peer evaluation piece. Just wanted to, I'm going to check off, answered it live, but if that wasn't exactly what you were looking for, I'm happy to elaborate a bit more on that. So just wanted to get that one out of the way. It was sort of aligned with what we were talking about, so I just wanted to jump in on that. 2 birds, 1 stone.
And the same thing happened at the Deakin University case. So thank you for connecting the dots there.
Yeah.
Folks.
Can I do one final thought just on the, like, how much freedom do you give individual instructors? I have a ton of trust and respect for individual educators and understanding their course and their learners and their context. I think what would be perhaps most beneficial from, like, a structural administrative perspective is a lot of education around risk. So risk around data security and privacy, and helping educators understand some of those risks. And then in the chat, the piece around large classes, and is that where knowledge transfer should happen? I'm just putting in the chat a link to Alpha School, which, if you are not familiar, is a private school model that's newer out of the US. It's K-12, and they are taking all sort of like knowledge acquisition tasks and putting it in a 2-hour AI generated personalized learning model, where the rest of the student's day is given over to collaborative, team-based, group-based, other kinds of skills. There's early evidence on the efficacy of that intensive personalized learning online experience for outcomes, student achievement. It's really expensive to go to Alpha School, so I am not making a plug for private education. I believe very deeply in the value of public education models, but I think that idea of how we absolutely transform the what and how of content and we can't skip it because to the degradation of critical thinking requires that we have that time. I'll stop. Thank you so much.
We have 5 minutes on the clock. I'd like us to use these 5 minutes on giving the listeners just maybe one practical tip that they can bring home to their instructors, to their learning designers, to their CTL teams on how to redesign assessments in the age of AI. I'll give one in 30 seconds. I have a friend who teaches entrepreneurship at the University of Amsterdam. He says, teams of 3, everyone should start a business where everyone puts in 20 euros, $20, whatever, all 3 members. And I want you to come together in 2 months and see who could make the most money. Which team could make the most money out of the $20 per person put in, which just really incentivized students to use AI tools. But in the meantime, they were using various entrepreneurial frameworks. Like there was a very strong academic angle to it. I think it's a beautiful case that really motivates people to learn while actually practicing and having fun. Any other ideas that you would give to the listeners?
I'd suggest helping your educators and yourselves understand that you don't have to be an expert in AI to begin thinking about how to make change, and that it's okay to feel like you can't keep up with it and you don't know absolutely everything about it. That is, it's a permission structure to say, this is changing so fast. I don't know how, and I'm going to try a little something. And the little something might be a conversation with your students in the class. The little something might be one invigilated assignment where you free the time or their percentage from something else. But yeah, my tip would be grace.
I'm going to take a bit more of a technical angle on this one, and I'm going to say use the tools that are available at your institution. I've worked with a lot of instructors that have gone rogue, and in this day and age of cybersecurity and data privacy support and just so many other things and cost. We're all dealing with cost. Don't do it. And you'd be surprised if you talk to someone in your IT department. There might already be something out there that is already in the works, in a pilot, already available. Start that conversation, communicate more with your IT department or someone in your department that specializes in an ed tech or teaching and learning capacity. That is a very good place to start. And you never know, those pie in the sky ideas might actually exist somewhere in a specific piece of ed tech.
Don't reinvent the wheel. Maybe an AI expert that your IT team already knows the answer for your question, or at least can engage in a discussion. Yeah, Lindsay?
I think one of the simplest things we can all do is to help destigmatize the use of generative AI and to position it like it's some evil, horrible thing. Because when we do that, even with these disclosure policies, it can feel really punitive in a way, Then we're creating a really unhelpful dichotomy between us and them, the naughty students, and we're the righteous educators. And I don't think that creates a context where our learners can be explorative and figure out how this adds to their education. So destigmatizing it, even if you don't like it, using it and talking to your students about how you used it and why you didn't really like it, even just once at the beginning of a course, can create a more honest landscape where people are discussing and exploring the way generative AI will feature in their lives instead of pushing them into the shadows where they're doing it in a sneaky way. Yeah, and I think those reflections, even when you integrate it into assessments, to have that piece where now do this reflection without generative AI and just talk about how that featured in your process. That can be very beneficial. It can just open up a dialogue.
What a beautiful wrap up of today's webinar. Folks, thank you for participating. I do have to make a note that indeed we'll have 2 kind of workshops coming up soon where you can also test FeedbackFruits tools first, and then a lot of them are about authentic alternative assessments. students assessing each other's, doing a social annotation, a document, a video annotation, a team-based learning, a discussion component. And I really hope and believe that by doing these pedagogies that are more fun than just writing a 300-page essay by yourself, actually incentivize students to use generative AI in an ethical and educational way. So I hope to see you at that workshop, and wishing everyone a wonderful afternoon. Take care.
Thanks so much. This was so
Thanks.
fun.
Thanks,
Thanks, folks.
everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye.